where. So I've just switched on the recording. Welcome, thank you for coming tonight.
But again, it's not, I'm not hearing anything.
You're not hearing anything?
Possible is your...
Are you connected with
your
audio?
speaker.
Is your audio on? But then he's going to hear you.
No, I don't want my mic on. Where's... I must be on.
Sorry, can everybody hear me? Is everybody fine? Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay, yes. Awesome. Okay, so welcome tonight. We welcome Stephen Symons to the Red Wheelbarrow, and we thank him for coming and joining us. He is a postdoctoral fellow, a graphic designer. He's published nationally and internationally, and tonight he's going to read poems from his publications and also some unpublished poems. And tonight we're going to do things a little differently. So in between his readings, he'd like us to have conversations in between. So if you have any questions, you can ask after he reads a poem, as opposed to waiting until the end of the reading. So to open up tonight, I'm going to read a poem from Olisinyezwa, his collection titled New Country. I have to be serious about many things. I have to be serious about many things. The strength in my little finger, my poems which make no meaning, as there is the handwritten confession, murder which drinks its onomatopoeic fluids. I have to be serious about where I will dress my body tonight, about where my reins will go. I feel inconsolable disaster. Murder moans in these city streets. Now 70 terrible secrets creep slowly through my nostrils, typewritten letters and confessions wailing inauspiciously conjunctions and obscurities. And with that, I hand over to Stephen.
Hello, good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining me for my reading, and thanks, of course, to the Red Wheelbarrow for hosting my reading. I'll be reading this evening from my 3 published collections and then a number of unpublished poems as well. So the reading itself will be in no chronological order. If you do have questions after a poem, feel free to ask them, and we'll have to just watch the time. I think I've got about half an hour to read. So I guess added to that, we might need probably another 15 minutes for the questions that appear in between the poems. But feel free, as I said, to ask questions, and I'll start right away. I'm going to be reading from my most recent collection, For Everything That Is Pointless and Perfect, and it's the title poem, For Everything That Is Pointless and Perfect. Find a sky emptied of cloud, and a home where voices have turned to powder. Delete laughter. There are the birds and their languages of feathers brushing fence lines of light, like a boy running his finger along a suburban picket until he finds a gap, hoping to glimpse a secret garden. Some have buried boredom and consigned their passion for laziness to old suitcases with tin handles in attics. Eventually, touch will disappear, along with the catch of a splinter, longings for lost love, and everything that is pointless and perfect. Belief has become the glow of a screen resting in our hands, the stained glass window of a digital cathedral lit by a dead sun. Thank you. I'm going to be reading another poem that also appears in this collection. It's titled The Fence. We came across the vast calm of a fence, a parabola drawn from a hiccup of a town, a part-time collector of animal hair, buckled feathers, and the battle flags of shopping centers, litterings of dreams. The fence gave chase alongside our car, the both of us heading towards a black sky and sour breath of a country gone mad. The fence gave up near a shotgun sign that warned, "This farmer shoots first." His land had struck a deal with the seasons. The crops were lush, rippled by sunlight, exempt from a sudden acceleration of darkness, rushing to meet us head on. When I turned on the headlights, they became two beams of truth, intent on pushing aside whole landscapes of lies. And again, the fence gave chase.
Sorry, I have a question about the fence. When you were composing the poem, were you thinking about fence? I mean, it's very clear in the poem that fence is used as a boundary, but weirdly enough, as soon as you said fences, I was thinking of America and Trump wanting to build a wall. Did it in any way influence the writing of the poem?
No, the poem itself was certainly pre-Trump, the Trump era. It was more so, I suppose, a simple landscape poem on one level, but also, I suppose, it can be interpreted as a commentary on the fences that we as South Africans and not necessarily South Africans per se, but as human beings build between ourselves and erect between ourselves.
Thank you.
The next no problem. The next poem is titled Firestorm, and it's a prose poem. It also appears in this collection. A breeze slips over suburbia, chooses a garden and fans the flames of greenery, whispering secrets in the dialects of youth. I call to my children, words splash just beyond their play, spilling on the edges of the garden, pooling near tool shed. I walk over and for no reason shoulder the door open. The interior is a trap of oxides and must. Shelves skewed by mass and age carry clouded jars containing nails, bolts, nuts, and evaporated histories. A vase clutches a fan of petrified brushes, and below it the innards of a power tool are arranged in 3 piles over an oil stain. In the far corner, a mower is bound to the dank with electrical cord. Its underbelly is caked with yellow wads of grass, and here too, its stone-chipped skin is fumed in oiled dust. I pry open a paint tin and poke at its rubbery dermis with a screwdriver. A half-light is crept over a summer long past. Everything is comatose, like a country that has crumbled under the weight of its history and heat. After a 3-day bombing raid on Dresden in 1945, some of the corpses were so brittle that flesh crumbled into clouds of ash. Huddles of children and whole families melted together in the firestorm. Outside, my children are laughing, ignoring my wife's call to lunch, relishing rebellion. Her words are becoming ash. Motes of her voice drift in the rules of light below the shed's roof. What is it that plots detail but spurs pain? I leave the shed and the rows of dead on the streets of Dresden. The door objects, and as I close it behind me, for a moment, it sounds like God clearing his throat. And then this poem was requested by someone this evening. It's titled Map for Adolescence. Part of me is navigating a new country that is my son. Topographies, contours, waypoints, all strung with muscle and sinew in the proximity of manhood. What was gradual became an alien geography overnight, requiring updated maps and storm gear, compass needles that ignored magnetic north, always swinging towards quests fraught with risk an insurrection. Are there any questions at this point, or can I move on?
There are no questions, but you have a greeting from Trevor on the chat.
Okay, thanks, Trevor. This particular poem is from the second collection, and it's titled "On Walking Through a House at Midnight and Using a Cell Phone as a Torch." How many worlds turn under similar accidents beneath Scorpio's raised tail, cropped by curtains heavy by the cells of the living? She warned, "Watch your step. Darkness turns mahogany to steel, and a ball and claw is a stone slab to find bones." But I blunder forward, marked by the tick of a stove's clock, knowing all too well furniture ambushes by night. Forgetting pain is the ultimate lesson. Nothing binds my feet to this planet except the life force of my children. The fogged half-light of my phone is the weakest of umbilicals, its calcium glow panned away by the void, sifted from the contours it skirts. Can it illuminate the thoughts of photographs, crockery, or the green lanes my twitching dog bounds down towards a gap in the fence we all seek? When the fridge releases its chilled light, the room is christened with cool. The house sighs as a mouthful of iced water washes away those sins. The tidal sway of sleep, leaves strewn over skin. Outside, night runs, pulsing, flowing, ephemeral, silent, beyond us, bleeding out. And then another poem from my second collection, and it's on a similar theme. It's titled, "My Daughter is Sleeping." My daughter is sleeping. Two blades of sunlight pair her curled beauty. She's still at play in that far-off world of her own making, a place of light and petal, a summer garden tinged with shadow. My love has no purchase on that world. My world is drawing heat, screens, freeway traffic, even violence. Outside, two birds have slipped her world to sing of her marvels to me. And then I've just finished reading a fascinating book called The Soul of the Octopus. And of course, no doubt we will know of the Oscar-winning documentary, South African documentary, My Octopus Teacher. This was written way before any of those publications. It's just simply titled Octopus. Of all the creatures on this planet, you are the obvious tourist, a castaway from a long dead galaxy, a bulb of brain trailing one limb torn to 8, gliding, science fiction in motion. You, sea chameleon, sand skirter, and ink squirter, alien visitor conjured of liquid brightness just beyond the permission of my lungs. With eyes the color of sun-speared sea that carry a curiosity more human than I would care to admit. A seer of the secrets of sadness, who has cornered me from the tinkling light of a stone lair to quiz my origins too, as gaps of my skin are pinched by sea wind and question marks, paused, entranced by an 8-footed being for whom procreation spells senescence, hunger, and then death. How are we doing for time? Okay.
We're still fine. We're still doing good.
Okay. Then I'm going to read maybe one poem before I move to my unpublished poems from my first collection, Questions for the Sea, and it's titled White Lies. I remember a wind slowed by heat and burst stone. I'd snowed a skin of ashen flakes in our honeymoon week. Our houses gasped at the flayed mountains, drawing in the leftover smoke, and the stillness that always follows destruction. Our songs broke in birds' throats, and language cracked in the carbon gauze of bedrooms. Even the whitest of lies were flecked grey by the fired sleet of their victims. And then I was near Boys Drive earlier today, visiting a friend. And I like this poem because it reminds me of False Bay, and I have a particular affinity for False Bay. It's titled Boys Drive. I rub away the splashes of salt that have tightened the skin on your shoulders. Your smile looks out towards the bay, where a trimmed fingernail of moon teeters on the fog. At last, a sea breeze releases the heat from the throats of the sandstone boulders behind us. Below, spades have stopped skidding over the gravel, and that fucking lawnmower is done with the grass. And I'm just looking at the time, so I'm going to move to some of my unpublished poems. These poems are mostly unedited, but I think they are worthy of reading. The first is a poem titled The Thief. There was the thuggery of his desk, its pine weight and rivers of wood grain running beneath last year's exam papers, roughed up textbooks and snapped rulers. In the corner of his office, a basket of canes awaited selection. Above it, a certificate, and then a single frosted window that looked out onto the quad, censoring the view, yet open far enough so I could see grazes of cloud over blue, and he could hear the conversations of teenage girls. 2 deflated rugby balls shared a shelf above his desk, stacked with more papers in manila folders, an empty photo frame, books about discipline and the minds of children. He'd accused me of stealing exercise books and sent me to his office to await a caning at the end of class. I waited for the coming fright of the bell, wondering, would I be allowed to choose a cane from the wicker basket, or what had happened to those stolen books? There was the shape of his deformed pinky, the way it defied the other fingers of his hand. How difficult it must be to catch a rugby ball or steady a ballpoint. I cannot remember if he caned me. I do remember the cherry blush of his cheeks and fine deltas of veins like the petrified rivers of Mars that spread towards the shaved lines of his jaw, and how he put me in the A team when I tackled Neil Parker. Then a poem titled The Ward. Before dawn, when a blanket is woven from the blue chill and light of undiscovered stars, time's membrane thins and a nurse imagines the dream whispers of her patients. Branches scratch their pleas against the roof and brickwork of the hospital. All is quiet, except for the click and hiss of respirators in a world where the lung has lost its power. In a corner bed, an old man curves the shape of an invisible womb, made infant again, striking a pose for an artist who never arrives. His dream has returned breath to the body of his wife. He feels her warmth, the rise and fall of her body as he treads water in that cold black sea between sleep and death. He wakes to the first disintegrations of darkness, the sound of a television, the rising rattle of a breakfast trolley and smell of porridge. At the far end of the ward's sheen, the nurse yawns and swipes a screen, scanning for rumors of hope and far-off miracles. but nothing is offered. Then a poem about my son who's recently entered boarding school. It's titled Poem for a Son Leaving Home. The room still carries his climate, its untidied tidiness, a damp towel and a single sock that will never be paired again. Some are saying this is good for him, the way people always say things, each to his own alphabet, each to his own God and devil. Yet another book is opened in a language I'm trying to learn, with its grammar of vacancy, the fluency of a perfectly made bed. There's no stopping this. Now, in its silence, the room is paused till the return of his voice, followed by body and used bedding. Before breakfast, I ran my finger over a scattering of grief, spilled sugar on a wooden table, catching the morning sun. Are there any questions, or can I continue?
Just one. Oh, and there's Paul. Paul has a question for you. Paul, you may unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sorry, I managed to raise the hand and clap and
Oh, that's okay.
got confused. So I don't really have a question. But while I'm here, Stephen, hi.
Hi, Paul. How's it?
Yeah, I was enjoying the I would say the particular kind of politics of your poetry, sort of the intimacy and focusing on family relations. And I was just wondering, in terms of other work that I know you do and have been doing for years, if you're writing other poetry that overlaps with or connects to that particular political experience of conscription and the dynamics that happened to many of us during those years, during the 1980s in particular. If you're doing writing that kind of writing.
I certainly have and am, and if you'd like, I could read one of the poems that do relate to conscription.
Please do.
I can do that. And what I will do is read a poem from my first collection. It, I think, appeared in Proofrock originally. It's titled Letter Home.
All right, before you do that, there are some questions for you in the chat.
Okay, let me bring that up. Let me find it. Chat. Okay, there we go.
So the first is, how do your children feel about being part of your poems?
Well, I wouldn't say much at this point. They have their own lives to lead and their busy lives, but you know, I try write about the stuff I know about, and I would feel something close to a fraud if I didn't write about stuff that I felt had a presence in my life and affected the way I navigate the world. And of course, you know, my children are an intimate part of my existence, and they enter my poems and leave my poems as well. But in terms of how they feel about being part of my poetry, I know my daughter is quite happy about one of the poems I wrote, because it was published somewhere where some of her friends actually saw it. So yes, in terms of my son's feeling about my poems, I have no idea.
And Ruth comments that she loved the image of the sugar catching the sun. And
thank you, Ruth.
She's asking what the title of the poem for your son is.
That poem
of that poem for your son?
It was just simply titled Poem for a Son Leaving Home.
Awesome. I think that covers all the questions in the chat, and you can go ahead and respond to Paul's request.
Okay, Paul, it's titled Letter Home. The shadows of the steel window frames are drawn back, then released by a breeze to reveal the sun-cracked gauze that lets the flies and mozzies in. Pretorius sits in a slash of light, brushing the opfok out of his boots, whistling, more spit than sound, as his hand blurs over the laces, scuffing his palm to the color of his overalls. We're all here, some in shorts that have slipped their drawstrings, others in vests with the life hung out of them, cleaning rifles or licking lies into envelopes. Beyond the base, churches are peeling for believers. Drunken notes tumble into the bungalow, swirling homesick motes, drawing memory into sunlight. So a happiness that masquerades as dust is held briefly by the doorway. Julle fucking naaiers gaan nou lekker afkak, is how it would begin. But before that, a shuffling line, dribbling fucks, forming in the after-lunch heat. So we could drop sandbags into each other's packs. Slowly, the weight would grow bones, gather flesh and sinew, and gnaw at our backs. Pretorius always stuffed a wet towel under his webbing to ease the rasp, clots of Vaseline too, that would stain his browns, a bitch to wash out. A week later, they found him in the heads, door ajar. Still sitting on the throne, a skull flopped forward, revealing a cracked bowl of bone, a chrysanthemum of brain, dripping pools of blood, exploring the flecked tiles and the butt of his R1. It lay there, in the snuggery between his toes, the blackened brass casing of his final letter home. Now, I think we're almost done. So I think we've got time for maybe one more poem. If you have any questions before I move on. And
I do have a question. Your earlier work seems to focus very much on light and dark. There's almost a balancing between light and dark, which your work, the work that you've read that's unpublished, is very different from what you do in your earlier pieces of work. Can you comment on kind of the mood of this new work that you're working on?
I guess that's a difficult question to answer, in that I've been referred to by in reviews of my work as a melancholic poet, as a poet who focuses on dark or darker matters. But I think a lot of the poems that I am writing presently are poems in sort of the post-lockdown period, for want of a better description, and are poems that are influenced by, other aspects of my life. And, life moves on and influences change, and, the climate changes, the country changes. So, and of course I'm reading different poets, and I mean influenced by different authors and poets. And it's, I suppose, just, part and parcel of one's development and journey as a writer, that one goes through these not necessarily major stylistic changes, but these are just, I suppose, different compositions in a larger piece, I guess. This particular poem is titled "Last Night I Dreamt You Left Me for Another Man." Someone is calling to me as clouds are dulling to the color of a dead tooth. Pink threads of day linger and then unravel without warning. Within the breath of this instant, thoughts die as quickly as they take flame. Swallows switch and glide, their wings dusted with the ashes of last light, their beaks stuffed with invisible insects. Inside, a kettle boils away the sadness of a kitchen on a Sunday evening. A window perspires, condensing time to a chart of deltas and tributaries that trickle to the bottom of the frames, to one of those irrelevant points of focus that coaxes the mind to wander off a cliff. Last night, I dreamt you left me for another man, and my heart became a cupboard of small cups overflowing with the sawdust of my dream. And now, the kitchen and its shapes and smells curdle to a dread planet, thickened by egg yolk and roughened by black crumbs of toast. Outside, the swallows have long since abandoned their prey. A bat scatters beneath a street light. A moth tempts fate. And that thought of you in the arms of another man finds the flowers on the kitchen curtains and combusts.
That was beautiful. I think you had, Jacques has a question for you. Had his hand up before you started.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Hello, Jacques.
Hello there. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi there.
Yes. Hi. Lovely reading. Thank you. I have a question about the title of your last collection, which I love, and it has to do with things that are perfect and pointless at the same time. I wondered if you wanted to say something about that connection, and whether you felt that that was true for poems, or what sort of things you felt that that description was true of.
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer or attempt to articulate, but I do think it has to do with those, I would suppose, irrelevant and supposedly useless fragments of beauty that we encounter every day, and we tend to ignore. And when one begins to notice those seemingly pointless and ultimately perfect details, they become quite interesting, simple things, you know. And I'm not going to describe what they are, but we all have those small details in our life that we mostly ignore. But when we take the time to focus and really to look a little harder, they are truly beautiful. And sometimes they lose their pointlessness and become quite meaningful. So yeah, it's, you know, that's, I guess, where the title comes from. Any other questions? I'm going to end with quite a hard poem, and it's an unpublished poem, so please bear with me. It's more than likely a poem in process, but I wanted to read it because I read a couple of days ago some horrific facts around the way in which humanity has treated the other organisms that we share the planet with, the other animals. And it's simply titled Small Souls. And it's no doubt going to be controversial on one level, and I'd be keen to hear your take on it. It's titled Small Souls. Forgive me, I know today is the day of your funeral, but I cannot write for you, and I've forgotten how to offer a prayer for the dead. A soft wind has taken you impossibly far from here, so I write for the insignificance of an ant that is about to be burned by a child with a magnifying glass. I write for the coming thirst of the rat, and for the inquisitive mouse with its back broken by a kitchen trap. I write for the flame-colored vixen cornered by a dozen hounds, and for the top-heavy bear, the sheer weight of her hairiness, swaying in anger, and the 4 cubs at her feet, burnt from their den by happy hunters. I write for the soaked lace wings of a dragonfly's drowning in a swimming pool, and the bee's last journey to the rose. I write for the Gothic madness of a fly trapped behind the stained glass solitude of the cathedral, and I write for a stray cat walking in ever-slowing circles with an arrow through its neck. I write for the teat-heavy bitch being stoned by a trap of boys on a highway. And I write for the concrete and straw lives of the lamb, the sow, and the cow awaiting the abattoir's bolt, and the fence-line lope of a lion tamed for the trophy room. I want to be a taxidermist for the soul of the earthworm, the caged finch, and flailing octopus in a fisherman's bait bucket. I want to display their lives from birth to death, from the nest until it is swept up by the ceaseless hurricane. I want to place the smallest of souls, of spiders, squirrels, and swallows in glass and mahogany cabinets, covered in children's fingerprints, in a museum of great sadness. I'll use an antique typewriter to type the stories of the irrelevance on cardboard labels that tell of a pain beyond our bodies. Later, I'll step out into the inconsolable cold and offer a sigh instead of a prayer in that dark hall of night. I'll walk towards a far-off door opening to a new day that is forever shifting out of reach and deeper into the murk. Thank you. If you do have any questions, fire away.
I don't have a question currently, but any questions are welcome. Annette does make a comment. She's left a comment for you in the chat box. She says, thank you. She agrees about the small things. Small Souls is a magnificent poem. That's what she says. And I agree with her. It is a magnificent poem. And I think in all the sadness that your poems carry, there is that light that shines through. So there is that possibility of hope that I can feel here from your reading. Thank you so much for coming. And there are some comments for you. Powerful reading from Rochelle and Kelvin.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Rochelle. Thanks, Colin. Any other questions before I hand over? No? Well, thank you everyone for listening and attending the reading. I really appreciate it. It's very, very different. Trying to gauge the audience's response in these interesting times that we live in. But I do appreciate you all attending and listening to my poetry and supporting South African poetry in general. So thanks again to the Red Wheelbarrow and to everyone who's attended. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you for gracing our virtual floor, for honoring your invitation to the Red Wheelbarrow. And yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you so much for coming. And we'll take a 10-minute break and then we'll open up our open mic session where we read works that we like, people that we've discovered, or work that is in progress. So I will see everyone in 10 minutes.